I never thought the smell of old leather and mahogany would become the scent of betrayal. But there I was, sitting in that law office on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the air conditioning humming too loud, making the room feel colder than it should have been. My father had just passed away 3 weeks earlier, and the grief was still raw, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison Caldwell, sat across from me with his hands folded on the desk, his silver cufflinks catching the fluorescent light. He had kind eyes, or at least I thought they were kind. Brown, with little crinkles at the corners that suggested he smiled often. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that made you trust him without question. My mother sat beside me, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the glass of water the secretary had brought in. She wore her black dress, the one she'd worn to the funeral, and I could still smell the faint trace of her perfume mixed with something else, something like sadness that had soaked into the fabric. My younger sister, Emma, sat on my other side, chewing her thumbnail the way she always did when she was nervous. She was only 19, still in college, and this whole thing felt too big for her. Hell, it felt too big for all of us. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, a soft sound that somehow commanded attention. He opened a manila folder, the paper inside crisp and official-looking. The sound of the pages rustling filled the quiet room, and I found myself holding my breath without meaning to. "Your father was a very thorough man," he said, his eyes moving between the three of us. "He made sure everything was in order. The will is straightforward, but there are some specific instructions he wanted me to convey personally." My mother nodded, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She hadn't been sleeping well. I could see it in the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged even when she tried to sit up straight. My father's death had been sudden. A heart attack while he was out jogging one morning. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. Just gone. "The estate is substantial," Mr. Caldwell continued. "The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio. Everything has been divided equally among the three of you, with your mother receiving the primary residence and a monthly stipend from the trust your father established." That all sounded normal, expected even. My father had been a successful architect, had built a good life for us. But then Mr. Caldwell paused, and something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his mouth, a flicker in his eyes that made my stomach clench. "However," he said, and that word hung in the air like a warning, "there is one additional beneficiary listed in the will." My mother's head snapped up. "What do you mean, an additional beneficiary?" Mr. Caldwell's fingers tapped once against the folder, a nervous gesture that seemed out of place for someone so composed. "Your husband left a portion of the estate to someone named Claire Dennison. 20% of the liquid assets, to be exact." The name meant nothing to me. I looked at my mother, saw the color drain from her face. Emma stopped chewing her nail and leaned forward, her voice small and confused. "Who's Claire Dennison?" Mr. Caldwell looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his leather chair. The sound of it creaking seemed too loud. "I don't have all the details," he said carefully. "But according to the documentation your father provided, Miss Dennison is someone he felt obligated to support." "Obligated," my mother repeated, and her voice had gone cold, sharp as broken glass. "What does that mean, obligated?" "I'm afraid I can't say more than what's written here," Mr. Caldwell replied. "But there's a sealed letter your father left for you, Mrs. Brennan. He asked that you read it privately." He slid a cream-colored envelope across the desk. My mother's name was written on it in my father's handwriting, those familiar loops and slants I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists my whole life. Seeing it now felt like a ghost reaching out from beyond. My mother took the envelope with shaking hands, but didn't open it. "Not here," she whispered. "Not now." We left the office in a daze, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight that felt wrong, too cheerful for the weight we were carrying. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and car exhaust. Emma walked ahead to the car, her shoulders hunched, while my mother stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching that envelope like it might explode. "Mom," I said gently, touching her arm, "we'll figure this out." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, yes, but also anger, and underneath it all, a deep, aching hurt. "Who is she, Daniel?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Who is this woman your father left money to?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. We drove home in silence, the radio off, just the sound of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Emma in the back seat. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a maple tree in the front yard that my father had planted when I was born. 32 years ago. The tree was huge now, its leaves just starting to turn orange and red with the changing season. Inside, the house still smelled like my father. His cologne, faint but present, mixed with the scent of coffee he'd always brewed too strong. His reading glasses were still on the side table by his favorite chair. His jacket still hung by the door. It was like he'd just stepped out and would be back any minute, except he wouldn't. He never would. My mother went straight to the kitchen and sat at the table, that envelope in front of her like a bomb. Emma and I stood in the doorway, neither of us sure what to do. Finally, my mother picked up the envelope and tore it open with shaking fingers. The sound of paper ripping seemed to echo. She pulled out 2 sheets of paper covered in my father's handwriting and began to read. I watched her face change, watched the color come and go, watched her eyes fill with tears that spilled over and ran down her cheeks. When she finished, she set the letter down carefully and covered her face with her hands. "Mom," Emma said, her voice high and frightened. "What does it say?" My mother took a long, shuddering breath and lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Claire Dennison is your father's daughter." The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but my brain couldn't process them. Emma made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I just stood there, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What?" I finally managed to say. "Your father had an affair," my mother said, and each word seemed to cost her something. 26 years ago. Before Emma was born, when you were 6, Daniel. He had an affair with a woman named Rebecca Dennison, and she got pregnant. Claire is his daughter. Your half-sister. The room spun. I reached out and grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Emma was crying now, full-on sobbing, and I felt like I should go to her, comfort her, but I couldn't move. My father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd come to every baseball game, who'd helped me with my math homework and told me he was proud of me, had another daughter. A daughter he'd kept secret for 26 years. "Did you know?" I asked my mother, and my voice sounded strange, distant. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head, tears still streaming. "No. I had no idea. He says in the letter that he's carried this guilt his whole life, that he's been sending money to support Claire all these years, but he never told me. He never told any of us." I felt sick, betrayed, angry, confused. All of it at once, a churning mess in my gut. "Where is she?" I asked. "This Claire. Does she know about us?" My mother picked up the letter again, her hands still shaking. "He says she knows. Rebecca told her years ago, and apparently she's been in contact with him. They've met. Multiple times. That hit me like a punch. He'd been meeting with her, spending time with her. While we thought he was at work or running errands, he'd been with another daughter, another family. How many lies had he told? How many times had he looked us in the eye and pretended everything was normal?" Emma stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't do this." And she ran from the room. I heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs, heard her bedroom door slam. My mother and I sat in the kitchen, as the afternoon light faded, neither of us speaking. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a dog barked. Normal sounds in a world that had just been turned upside down. "I need to find her," I said finally. "Claire. I need to talk to her." My mother looked at me, her eyes hollow. "Why?" "Because she's my sister," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Because I need to understand. Because Dad's gone and he can't explain, so maybe she can." My mother was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "The letter has an address. In Portland. She lives in Portland." Portland was 3 hours away. I could drive there tomorrow. I could knock on her door and demand answers. But even as I thought it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing about this was simple. That night, I lay in bed in my old childhood room, staring at the ceiling. I'd moved out years ago, had my own apartment across town, but I'd been staying here since Dad died, helping Mom with arrangements, with paperwork, with all the endless tasks that come with death. Now I wondered if I'd ever really known him at all. The man I'd called Dad, the man I'd loved and admired, had been living a double life. Had been lying to us every single day. I thought about all the times he'd been late coming home, all the weekend trips he'd taken for work, all the phone calls he'd stepped outside to take. Had those been her? Had he been talking to Claire, meeting with Claire, being a father to Claire while we sat at home waiting for him? The anger burned hot in my chest, but underneath it was something worse. Grief all over again, but different this time. I was grieving not just the loss of my father, but the loss of who I thought he was. The man I'd known was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd kept secrets and told lies, and had a whole other child he'd never mentioned. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to pale morning light filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. My mother was already awake, probably hadn't slept at all. When I went down to the kitchen, I found her sitting in the same spot as the night before, a mug cradled in her hands, staring at nothing. "I'm going to Portland," I told her. "Today. I need to meet her." My mother nodded without looking at me. "Be careful, Daniel. This girl, she didn't ask for any of this either." "I know," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Part of me wanted to blame Claire, wanted her to be the villain in this story, even though logically I knew she was just as much a victim of my father's choices as we were. The drive to Portland felt endless. I took the interstate, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to farmland to forest. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the air that came through the cracked windows smelled damp and earthy. I had the address written on a piece of paper on the passenger seat, and I'd looked it up on a map before leaving. It was an apartment building downtown, nothing fancy from what I could see in the street view images. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tight, my knuckles white. I didn't know what I was going to say. "Hi, I'm your brother, surprise. Did you know about us the whole time? Did you meet our father at birthday parties, while we were at home thinking he was working late?" The questions churned in my mind, each one sharper than the last. I reached Portland just after noon. The city was busy, people everywhere, cars honking, the smell of food trucks and coffee shops mixing with exhaust fumes. I found the apartment building easily enough, a 6-story brick structure with a green awning over the entrance. My heart pounded as I parked and got out of the car. The air was cooler here, and I could smell rain coming. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the building. Apartment 314, 3rd floor. I could turn around right now, get back in my car, drive home and pretend I'd never come. But I couldn't. I needed answers. The lobby was small and clean, with mailboxes along one wall and an elevator that looked like it had been installed sometime in the 1970s. I took the stairs instead, needing the time to think, to prepare. Each step echoed in the stairwell, and by the time I reached the 3rd floor, my heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the climb. Apartment 314 was at the end of the hall. I stood in front of the door, my hand raised to knock, and hesitated. What if she wasn't home? What if she was home but refused to talk to me? What if she slammed the door in my face? I knocked before I could talk myself out of it. 3 sharp raps that sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. For a moment, nothing. Then I heard footsteps, soft and quick, and the sound of a lock turning. The door opened, and I found myself face to face with a young woman who looked so much like my father it took my breath away. She had his eyes. The same deep brown, the same shape. His nose straight and slightly narrow. His chin, with that little dimple in the center. Her hair was dark like his had been before it went gray, pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was soft, a little uncertain. "You're Daniel." It wasn't a question. She knew who I was. Had probably seen pictures, just like I was sure my father had shown her pictures of us. The thought made my stomach turn. "Yeah," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "I'm Daniel. And you're Claire." She nodded, stepping back from the door. "Do you want to come in?" I did and I didn't. But I'd driven 3 hours to get here, so I nodded and followed her inside. The apartment was small but cozy, with warm lighting and plants on the windowsill. It smelled like vanilla and something baking, maybe cookies. There were books everywhere, stacked on shelves and piled on the coffee table. A laptop sat open on the couch, and I could see what looked like a half-written essay on the screen. "I'm sorry," she said, closing the laptop and moving it aside. "I wasn't expecting anyone. Do you want some tea? Coffee?" "No," I said, then realized how harsh that sounded. "No, thank you. I need to talk to you." She sat down on the couch and gestured to the chair across from her. I sat, feeling awkward and angry and sad all at once. Up close, the resemblance to my father was even more striking. It was like looking at a ghost. "I got a call from Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "The lawyer. He told me about the will, about your father leaving me money. I told him I didn't want it. That surprised me." "You didn't want it?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It feels wrong. Your mother, your sister, you're his real family. I don't know what I am. You're his daughter, I said, and the words tasted bitter. Apparently you've been his daughter for 26 years, and we had no idea. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm sorry. I know this must be awful for you. It's been awful for me too. How long have you known? I asked. About us? She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. My mom told me when I was 12. She said my father was a good man who'd made a mistake, and that he had another family, a wife and kids, and that he couldn't be with us the way we might want. But he sent money every month. He made sure we were taken care of. Did you ever meet him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded. The first time was when I was 16. I wanted to meet him, to know him, and my mom arranged it. We met at a coffee shop, and he was so nervous. His hands were shaking when he shook mine. We talked for 2 hours, and he told me about his work, about architecture, about how he loved designing buildings that would last. He didn't talk about you, about his other family. I think it hurt him too much. I felt like I'd been punched. While I was 16, playing baseball and worrying about getting my driver's license, my father had been meeting his secret daughter at a coffee shop. How many other times had there been? How many lies? How often did you see him? I asked. Claire looked down at her hands. Once or twice a year, usually. Sometimes more. He'd come to Portland for work, or he'd say he was coming for work, and we'd meet for lunch or dinner. He came to my high school graduation. Sat in the back so no one would notice. He sent me birthday cards every year, always with a note telling me he was proud of me. My throat felt tight. He came to your graduation. I didn't ask him to, she said quickly. I didn't even know he was coming until I saw him there. Daniel, I never wanted to take anything from you. I never wanted to hurt your family. But you did, I said, and my voice broke. You did hurt us. Maybe not on purpose, but finding out about you, it's destroyed everything. My mom is devastated. My sister won't come out of her room. And me, I don't even know who my father was anymore. Claire was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound her quiet crying and the hum of traffic from the street below. I felt empty, hollowed out. I'd come here angry, ready to confront her, to blame her, but sitting here looking at her, I couldn't. She was just a kid who'd wanted to know her father. Just like I'd been a kid who'd thought he knew his father. Why did he do it? I asked finally. Why did he keep you a secret? Why didn't he just tell us? Claire took a shaky breath. He said he was ashamed. That he'd made a terrible mistake, and he didn't want to hurt your mother, didn't want to destroy his family. But he also couldn't abandon me and my mom. So he tried to do both, and I guess in the end, he failed at both. She was right. He had failed. He'd failed all of us by lying, by hiding, by trying to live 2 lives instead of being honest. What was your mom like? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Rebecca. Claire's face softened a little. She's strong. She raised me by herself, worked 2 jobs to make sure I had everything I needed. She never spoke badly about your father, even though she had every right to. She said he was a good man who'd made a bad choice, and that people are complicated. People are complicated, I repeated. That felt like an understatement. Claire stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a photo album. She brought it back and sat beside me, opening it carefully. Inside were pictures of her growing up. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. A teenager in a soccer uniform. A young woman in a cap and gown. And in some of the pictures, in the background or standing slightly apart, was my father. There he was at what looked like a park, Claire maybe 10 years old on a swing. There he was at a restaurant, Claire across the table from him, both of them smiling. There he was at her college graduation, pride written all over his face. I stared at the photos, feeling like I was looking at an alternate universe. A version of my father's life I'd never known existed. He loved you, I said quietly. Claire closed the album. I think he loved all of us. I think that was the problem. He loved too many people, and didn't know how to make it work. I left Claire's apartment an hour later, my head spinning. She'd given me her phone number, said I could call if I wanted to talk more, if I had questions. I'd taken it, folded the paper and put it in my pocket, not sure if I'd ever use it. The drive home was a blur. Rain started falling halfway back, heavy drops that drummed against the windshield and made the road shimmer. I thought about my father, about the man he'd been, and the man I'd thought he was. I thought about Claire, sitting alone in that apartment, carrying the weight of being a secret. I thought about my mother and Emma, both of them dealing with their own pain. When I got home, it was dark. The house was quiet, just one light on in the living room. My mother was there, still in the same clothes from that morning. a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. How was she? She asked when I walked in. I sat down beside her, suddenly exhausted. She's nice. She looks like him. She didn't want the money. My mother nodded slowly. I believe that. She showed me pictures, I said, of her and Dad. He went to her graduations, Mom. High school and college. He was there. My mother's face crumpled, and she started to cry. Not the quiet tears from before, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. I put my arm around her and held her while she cried, and I cried too, both of us mourning not just the man we'd lost, but the trust, the certainty, the life we'd thought we had. The next few weeks were strange and painful. Emma eventually came out of her room, but she was different, quieter, more withdrawn. She'd always been the bright one, the optimistic one, and seeing her so subdued broke my heart. My mother moved through the house like a ghost, going through the motions of living, but not really there. She'd started packing up my father's things, boxing up his clothes and books, but she'd stop sometimes and just stand there holding one of his shirts, breathing in the fading scent of him. I went back to my apartment, but found I couldn't stay there. The silence was too loud, my thoughts too overwhelming. I kept thinking about Claire, about the photos, about my father's double life. I'd pull out the piece of paper with her number on it, stare at it, put it away again. It was Emma who finally broke the stalemate. She came to my apartment on a Saturday morning, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. I want to meet her, she said without preamble. Claire, I want to meet our sister. Emma, I started, but she cut me off. No, Daniel. I've been thinking about this. Dad lied to us, and that's awful, and I'm so angry at him I can barely breathe sometimes. But Claire didn't lie. She didn't do anything wrong. And she's our sister. Half-sister, whatever. She's family, and I want to meet her. I looked at my little sister, saw the resolve in her face, and felt something shift inside me. She was right. Claire was family, whether we'd known about her or not. And maybe, just maybe, getting to know her wouldn't be a betrayal of our father's memory, but a way to understand him better. Okay, I said. I'll call her. I did, that afternoon. Claire answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Hello. Claire, it's Daniel. I paused, not sure how to say what I needed to say. My sister, Emma, she wants to meet you. We both do. If you're willing. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard her take a shaky breath. Really? Really, I said. Maybe we could meet somewhere neutral. Get coffee or something. I'd like that, she said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. I'd really like that. We arranged to meet the following weekend at a cafe halfway between our cities. A place called the Riverside Cafe that sat along a river, with outdoor seating and a view of the water. When Emma and I arrived, Claire was already there, sitting at a table by the railing, her hands wrapped around a mug. She stood when she saw us, and I saw the nervousness in her eyes, the way she twisted her hands together. Emma walked right up to her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Emma did something I didn't expect. She hugged her, just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Claire, and Claire hugged her back, both of them crying. I'm Emma, my sister said when they pulled apart, and I'm really glad to meet you. I'm glad to meet you too, Claire said, wiping at her eyes. I've thought about you so much over the years. Both of you. We sat down, and for a while it was awkward. We ordered coffee and pastries, made small talk about the weather and the drive. But gradually, slowly, we started to really talk. Claire told us about her life, about growing up with just her mom, about studying literature in college, about her dream of becoming a teacher. Emma told her about her own college experience, about her major in environmental science, about the research project she was working on. I talked about my job in marketing, about the campaigns I'd worked on, about the trip to Japan I'd taken the year before. And then, inevitably, we talked about our father. What was he like? Claire asked. At home, I mean. With you. Emma and I exchanged glances. He was great, Emma said softly. He was funny and kind, and he always had time for us. He'd help me with my homework, even when he was tired from work. He'd take us camping in the summer. He taught Daniel how to fix cars. He taught me how to shave, I added, remembering that awkward morning in the bathroom when I was 14, my father patient and encouraging as I fumbled with the razor. He came to all my baseball games, even the away ones that were hours away. Claire smiled, but it was sad. He told me about your baseball games. He was so proud of you. He'd show me the stats from your season, tell me about the home runs you hit. That hit me hard. He'd talked about me to her, had been proud enough to share those moments, even if he couldn't share them with both of us at the same time. He was proud of you too, I said. When I was at your apartment, I could see it. The way he looked at you in those photos. Claire's eyes filled with tears again. I just wish it could have been different. I wish he could have been honest. I wish we could have all known each other. Me too, Emma said quietly. Me too. We stayed at that cafe for hours, talking and crying and slowly, carefully building something new. Not a replacement for what we'd lost, but something different. A connection, fragile and uncertain, but real. Over the next few months, we saw Claire regularly. Sometimes it was just coffee, sometimes dinner. Once a movie that we all agreed was terrible but laughed about afterward. My mother was slower to come around. She met Claire once, briefly, at a neutral location I'd arranged. It was tense and painful, my mother's face tight with emotion, Claire apologizing over and over for existing, for being a reminder of my father's betrayal. But my mother surprised me. After that first meeting, she started seeing a therapist, started working through her anger and grief. And slowly, very slowly, she softened toward Claire. She'll never be my daughter, she told me one evening. But she was your father's daughter, and that means something. It has to mean something, or else what was any of it for? It was about 6 months after my father's death when we all gathered at the house for what would have been his 65th birthday. My mother, Emma, me, and Claire. We decided to do something to honor him, even though we were all still angry, still hurt, still processing. My mother had made his favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. The smell filled the house, rich and savory, and for a moment it felt like he might walk through the door any second, calling out that he was home. We sat around the dining room table, the 5 chairs feeling both too many and not enough. My mother had put out the good china, the set my father had bought her for their 20th anniversary. Claire sat across from me, looking nervous and grateful and sad all at once. I want to say something, my mother said as we finished eating. We all looked at her, waiting. She took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. Your father, our father, she corrected, glancing at Claire, was not a perfect man. He made choices that hurt all of us. He lied, and he hid things, and he left us with a mess to clean up. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. But he also loved us. All of us. And I think, in his own flawed way, he tried to do right by everyone. He failed, but he tried. And I think we owe it to ourselves, and to him, to try too. To build something good out of this mess he left behind. Emma reached over and took my mother's hand. Claire was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. I felt my own eyes burning. To Dad, I said, raising my water glass. Flawed, complicated, and loved. To Dad, they echoed, and we clinked our glasses together. After dinner, Claire pulled out a box she'd brought with her. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all from my father. He wrote to me, she explained. Every month, sometimes more. I thought maybe you'd want to read them, to understand him better. My mother took the box with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered. That night, after Claire had driven back to Portland and Emma had gone up to bed, my mother and I sat in the living room reading those letters. They were full of my father's thoughts, his regrets, his love for Claire, and his guilt over the situation he'd created. But they were also full of love for us, for my mother and Emma and me. He wrote about how proud he was of his family, how much he wished things could be different, how he hoped that someday, somehow, we'd all be able to forgive him. One letter, dated just a month before he died, stood out. In it, he wrote about his will, about his decision to leave money to Claire, and to tell us the truth after he was gone. He knew it would hurt us, knew it would change everything, but he couldn't keep lying. He couldn't die with that secret still buried. I'm a coward, he wrote in his careful handwriting. I couldn't tell you while I was alive, couldn't face your pain and anger. But I can't leave this world without you knowing the truth. Claire deserves to be acknowledged. She deserves to be part of the family, even if I was too weak to make that happen while I was alive. I hope you can forgive me. I hope you can forgive her. And I hope that maybe in time, you can all find a way to be a family together. My mother set the letter down and looked at me, her eyes red but clear. He was right about one thing, she said. Claire does deserve to be part of this family. And so do we. All of us. I nodded, feeling something loosen in my chest. Something that had been tight and painful since that day in the lawyer's office. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. I wasn't sure I could forgive my father for the lies, for the years of deception. But it was acceptance. Acceptance that he'd been human, flawed and complicated, and capable of both great love and great mistakes. The following year brought more changes. Emma graduated from college, and Claire came to the ceremony, sitting with my mother and me in the stands, cheering as Emma walked across the stage. My mother sold the house, said it was too full of memories, both good and bad, and bought a smaller place closer to town. She started dating again, tentatively, and though it was strange to see her with someone who wasn't my father, I was glad she was moving forward. Claire and I grew closer. We'd meet for lunch once a month, sometimes more, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. She told me about the guy she was dating, a teacher at the school where she'd gotten a job. I told her about my promotion at work, about the new apartment I'd moved into. We were building a relationship, slowly and carefully, learning to be siblings. One afternoon, almost 2 years after my father's death, Claire called me. Her voice was excited, breathless. "Daniel, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." I felt a rush of emotion. Happiness for her, but also a deep sadness that my father would never meet his grandchild. "That's amazing, Claire. Congratulations." "Thank you," she said, and then her voice got quieter. "I was thinking, if it's a boy, I'd like to name him after Dad. After our dad. If that's okay with you and Emma and your mom." I felt tears prick my eyes. I think Dad would have loved that. When Claire's son was born 8 months later, we were all there. My mother, Emma, and me, crowded into the hospital room, passing around the tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. He had Claire's nose and her boyfriend's chin, but when he opened his eyes, they were dark brown, just like my father's. "Harrison," Claire said softly, looking down at her son. "Harrison Daniel Dennison." My mother started crying, and Emma hugged her. I stood there holding my nephew, this tiny piece of the future, and felt something shift. The anger and hurt that had lived in my chest for so long didn't disappear, but it changed. It became something softer, something more like understanding. My father had made mistakes. Terrible, hurtful mistakes that had fractured our family and left scars that would never fully heal. But he'd also created this connection between us, this family that was messy and complicated and born out of pain, but was still a family. As little Harrison grew, he became the bridge that connected us all in ways we never expected. His first birthday party was held at my mother's new house, the backyard decorated with blue and yellow balloons that bobbed in the summer breeze. The air smelled like cut grass and the burgers my mother was grilling. Claire's boyfriend Marcus was there, along with Rebecca, Claire's mother, who I'd finally met a few months earlier. That meeting had been awkward at first, both of us not sure what to say to each other, but Rebecca had been kind and gracious, and I'd seen where Claire got her strength. Emma brought her new girlfriend, Sophia, a marine biologist she'd met at a conference. My mother had invited a few of her friends, women from her book club who'd supported her through the worst of the grief and anger. We were an odd collection of people, brought together by secrets and lies and death, but as I watched Harrison toddle around the yard, chasing bubbles and laughing, I thought maybe we were also brought together by love. My mother spent a long time talking with Rebecca that afternoon. I watched them from across the yard, two women who'd loved the same man, who'd been hurt by the same man, finding some kind of peace with each other. When they hugged before Rebecca left, I saw my mother's shoulders shake, saw Rebecca pat her back gently, and I knew they'd reached some understanding that I might never fully grasp, but was grateful for nonetheless. That night, after everyone had gone home and Emma and I were helping my mother clean up, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, I spent so long being angry at your father. Angry at Rebecca. Angry at Claire. Angry at the whole situation. But anger is exhausting, and it doesn't change anything. What happened happened. We can't undo it. All we can do is decide what we do next." "What do we do next?" Emma asked, tying up a garbage bag full of paper plates and cups. My mother smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from her in a long time. "We keep showing up. We keep being a family, whatever that looks like now. We keep loving each other, even when it's hard." It was hard sometimes. There were moments when the old anger would flare up, when I'd see Claire and remember all the lies, all the times my father had chosen to be with her instead of being honest with us. There were holidays that felt wrong, birthdays that were tinged with sadness. Emma struggled with trust issues in her relationship, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Sophia to reveal some terrible secret. My mother had nightmares sometimes, would wake up in the middle of the night convinced my father was in the house, that she could hear his footsteps. But there were good moments too. Harrison's second birthday, when he said my name for the first time, calling me Uncle Danny in his sweet toddler voice. The Christmas when Claire and Marcus got engaged, and we all celebrated together, toasting with champagne and cider. The summer vacation we all took together, renting a beach house for a week and spending our days in the sand and surf, Harrison building castles while the adults talked and laughed and slowly healed. It was during that beach vacation that I finally had the conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years. Claire and I were walking along the shore one evening, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and pinks, the water cool around our ankles. Harrison was back at the house with my mother and Emma, probably being spoiled with extra dessert. "Can I ask you something?" I said, watching the waves roll in and out. "Of course," Claire said. "Do you ever wish he'd chosen differently? That he'd left us and been with you and your mom full time? Or that he'd never had the affair at all, and you'd never been born?" Claire was quiet for a long time, her feet making soft prints in the wet sand. "I used to," she finally said. "When I was younger, I'd wish he could be my dad all the time, not just a few times a year. I'd see other kids with their fathers and feel so jealous. But as I got older, I realized that if he'd made different choices, I wouldn't exist. And I like existing, even if the circumstances weren't ideal." She paused, bending down to pick up a shell, turning it over in her hands. "And now, knowing you and Emma and your mom, I'm glad things happened the way they did. Not glad that people got hurt, but glad that I get to have you all in my life. Does that make sense?" "It does," I said. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you exist too." She smiled at me, and in that moment, with the sunset painting everything gold and the sound of the ocean in our ears, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The years continued to pass. Harrison started preschool, then kindergarten. Claire and Marcus got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard, and Emma was a bridesmaid, standing up there in a lavender dress and crying happy tears. My mother walked Claire down the aisle, and when I saw them together, my mother's hand on Claire's arm, both of them smiling through their tears, I thought about my father and wondered if he could see this, if he knew what his choices had ultimately created. I started dating someone, a woman named Rachel, who worked in graphic design. She knew about my complicated family situation, and instead of running away, she embraced it. She came to family dinners and Harrison's birthday parties, and she fit in seamlessly, laughing at Emma's jokes and helping my mother in the kitchen. Emma and Sophia moved in together, adopting a rescue dog they named Barnacle, which they thought was hilarious and the rest of us thought was ridiculous. But watching Emma happy, watching her build a life with someone she loved, made me think that maybe we were all going to be okay. It was 5 years after my father's death when we finally did something we'd been talking about for a while. We went back to Mr. Caldwell's office, all of us together. My mother, Emma, Claire, and me. The office looked the same, still smelled like old leather and mahogany, still had that too loud air conditioning. But this time, we weren't there to hear about secrets and betrayals. We were there to set up a trust fund for Harrison, and for any other grandchildren that might come along. We were there to make sure that the money my father had left, the money that had once been a symbol of his lies, would be used for something good. Mr. Caldwell looked older, more gray in his hair, but his eyes were still kind. "It's good to see you all," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "I'm glad you found a way forward." After we'd signed all the papers and made all the arrangements, we stood outside the office building, the 5 of us, in the bright afternoon sunshine. The air smelled like spring, like flowers blooming and fresh rain. "I think Dad would be happy," Emma said quietly, "that we're all together." My mother nodded. "I think he would be too. I think it's what he wanted all along, even if he went about it in the worst possible way." Claire reached out and took my mother's hand, then Emma's, then mine. We stood there in a circle, connected, and I felt the weight of the past 5 years, all the pain and anger and slow, difficult healing. "We're going to be okay," I said, and I believed it. "We are," my mother agreed. Several more years passed, and life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Emma and Sophia got married in a ceremony on the beach, with Harrison, now 7 years old, serving as the ring bearer and taking his job very seriously. Rachel and I got engaged, and when I proposed, I did it at the house where I grew up, in the backyard under the maple tree my father had planted when I was born. My mother cried, and Emma cheered, and Claire hugged Rachel and welcomed her to the family. My mother started volunteering at a grief support group, helping other people who'd lost spouses navigate the complicated emotions that came with death and betrayal. She said it helped her, being able to turn her pain into something useful, something that could help others. Claire had another baby, a daughter this time, and they named her Eleanor Rose. She had Claire's smile and Marcus's laugh, and when I held her for the first time, I marveled at how much life had changed, how much we'd all changed. Rachel and I got married on a crisp October day, the leaves turning brilliant colors all around us. Both Emma and Claire stood up with Rachel as bridesmaids, and my mother walked me down the aisle, her hand steady on my arm. It was unconventional, but then again, so was our family. At the reception, as we all danced and celebrated, I looked around at the people gathered there. My mother, laughing at something one of her friends said. Emma and Sophia, swaying together on the dance floor. Claire and Marcus, with Harrison and Eleanor, looking tired but happy. Rachel's family, who'd welcomed all of my complicated history without judgment. And I thought about my father, about the man who'd set all of this in motion with his choices, both good and bad. I still didn't know if I'd fully forgiven him. Some days I thought I had, other days the old anger would surface, sharp and unexpected. But I'd learned that forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And I was on that journey, we all were, taking it one day at a time. That night, after the reception had ended and Rachel and I were alone in our hotel room, she asked me if I was happy. I thought about it, really thought about it, and realized that I was. Not in the simple, uncomplicated way I'd been happy as a child, before I knew about secrets and lies and the ways people could hurt each other, but in a deeper, more complex way. A happiness that acknowledged pain but chose joy anyway. A happiness that was built on truth, even when that truth was difficult. Yes, I told her. I'm happy. The years continued to roll by, as they do. Harrison grew into a thoughtful, kind boy who loved reading and soccer. Eleanor became a spitfire of a toddler, keeping Claire and Marcus on their toes. Emma and Sophia talked about having kids of their own, maybe through adoption or a sperm donor. My mother started dating someone seriously, a widower named Frank who'd lost his wife to cancer and understood grief in a way most people didn't. Rachel and I had a son, and we named him James, after Rachel's father. When my mother held him for the first time, she cried and said he had my father's hands, long fingers and broad palms. I looked down at my son's tiny hands and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Love, certainly. Hope. But also a determination to be different, to be honest, to never put my child through what my father had put us through. On what would have been my father's 75th birthday, we all gathered at the cemetery where he was buried. It had become a tradition of sorts, this annual visit. We'd bring flowers and stand around his grave and talk, sometimes about him, sometimes about our lives, sometimes about nothing in particular. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates, with a line underneath that read "Beloved Father." We debated that inscription for weeks after he died, my mother wanting to add husband, Emma arguing that he didn't deserve any title at all, me somewhere in the middle. In the end, we'd settled on father because that's what he'd been, for better or worse, to all of us. Harrison, now 10 years old, placed a bouquet of sunflowers on the grave. They were my father's favorite, bright and cheerful, always turning toward the sun. Grandpa Harrison would have liked these, right? He asked, looking up at Claire. He would have loved them, Claire said, her hand on his shoulder. Eleanor, for years old and full of questions, tugged on my mother's hand. Grandma, why didn't I get to meet Grandpa Harrison? My mother knelt down, her knees creaking a little, and brushed Eleanor's dark hair out of her face. He died before you were born, sweetheart. But he would have loved you so much. Did he love you? Eleanor asked with the blunt honesty of a child. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Yes, he did. He loved all of us. He just didn't always know how to show it the right way. Emma stood with her arm around Sophia, and I noticed she was crying quietly. Rachel squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, grateful for her presence, for her steadiness. Little James was asleep in his stroller, oblivious to the weight of the moment. I miss him, Emma said suddenly, her voice breaking. I'm still so angry at him, but I miss him. Is that crazy? It's not crazy, my mother said, standing up and going to Emma, pulling her into a hug. You can be both, angry and missing him. It's all part of loving someone who was complicated. Claire wiped at her own eyes. I miss him too. I miss the version of him I got to know, and I miss the version I never got to know. The one who could have been honest, who could have brought us all together while he was still alive. We stood there in silence for a while, the wind rustling through the trees, carrying the scent of cut grass and flowers. A bird sang somewhere nearby, a clear, sweet sound that seemed too cheerful for the moment, but somehow fit anyway. I think he'd be proud of us, I said finally, for figuring this out, for becoming a family despite everything. My mother nodded. I think you're right. I think he'd be amazed and grateful, and probably still feeling guilty, because that's who he was. But yes, I think he'd be proud. As we walked back to our cars, Harrison ran ahead with Eleanor, the two of them playing some game only they understood. Marcus and Sophia were talking about a documentary they'd both watched. My mother and Frank walked hand in hand, and I saw her lean her head on his shoulder, saw him kiss the top of her head gently. Claire fell into step beside me, Rachel on my other side. "Thank you," Claire said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For giving me a chance. For letting me be part of this family. I know it wasn't easy." I looked at her, this woman who was my sister, who I'd hated and resented and slowly, painfully learned to love. "You're part of this family because you deserve to be. Not because of Dad, but because of you." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "That means a lot." That evening, we all gathered at my mother's house for dinner, as had become our custom after cemetery visits. The house smelled like roasted chicken and herbs, and there was laughter and conversation filling every room. Harrison and Eleanor played with James's baby toys, making him giggle. Emma and Sophia told stories about their recent trip to the Galapagos. Claire and Marcus talked about the addition they were planning to build on their house. My mother and Frank discussed the garden they were planting together. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, Rachel beside me, and just watched. This family, this strange, complicated, beautiful family that had been born out of pain and secrets and loss. We weren't perfect. We still had hard days, still had moments when the old wounds ached. But we were here, together, and that meant something. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Rachel and I were driving back to our house with James asleep in his car seat, she asked me what I was thinking about. "I'm thinking about how life never turns out the way you expect," I said. "How 10 years ago, I thought my life was falling apart, and in some ways it was. But it was also coming together in ways I never could have imagined." "Do you think you've forgiven him?" Rachel asked. "Your dad?" I thought about it, watching the streetlights pass by, the familiar roads leading us home. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I've accepted what happened. I've made peace with it. I've chosen to focus on what we built from the ruins, rather than the ruins themselves. Maybe that's a kind of forgiveness. Rachel reached over and took my hand. I think that's exactly what forgiveness is. The years kept moving forward, as they always do. Harrison became a teenager, moody and thoughtful, with a talent for writing that reminded me of Claire. Eleanor started school and made friends easily, her bright personality drawing people to her. James grew from a baby to a toddler to a little boy who loved dinosaurs and asked a million questions about everything. Emma and Sophia adopted twin girls from foster care, 6-year-old sisters named Maya and Zoe, who'd been through more in their short lives than any child should. Watching Emma become a mother, seeing her patience and love with those girls, made me proud in a way I couldn't quite articulate. My mother and Frank got married in a quiet ceremony at the courthouse, just family present. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small bouquet of roses. When the judge pronounced them married and Frank kissed her, I saw my mother smile in a way she hadn't smiled in years. Pure joy, uncomplicated by grief or anger or the weight of the past. Claire's career took off. She became a department head at her school, then moved into administration, working to develop curriculum that would help kids from difficult backgrounds succeed. She said it was her way of honoring her own childhood, of taking the challenges she'd faced and turning them into something that could help others. Rachel and I had another child, a daughter we named Lily. She had Rachel's red hair and my father's brown eyes, and the first time Claire saw her, she gasped. "She looks just like him," Claire said, and there was wonder in her voice, not pain. On the 10th anniversary of my father's death, we did something different. Instead of going to the cemetery, we gathered at the house where I'd grown up. My mother had sold it years ago, but the new owners were kind people who, when we explained the situation, agreed to let us visit the backyard for an hour. The maple tree my father had planted was huge now, its branches spreading wide, providing shade for half the yard. We stood under it, all of us, 3 generations of family that my father had created, both intentionally and accidentally. Harrison, now 15, had written something he wanted to read. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, his hands shaking slightly. "I never met my grandfather," he began, his voice cracking a little. "But I've heard so many stories about him. Some good, some bad, some complicated. And I've been thinking a lot about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone." He paused, looking around at all of us. Grandpa Harrison left behind a mess. He made mistakes that hurt people he loved, but he also left behind this. He gestured to all of us. A family that learned how to love each other despite everything. A family that chose to stay together when it would have been easier to fall apart. And I think that's a pretty good legacy, even if it's not the one he planned. My mother was crying, and so was Claire. Emma had her arms around Maya and Zoe, holding them close. Rachel leaned against me, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the weight and warmth of my family all around me. Harrison folded up his paper and looked at the tree. So thank you, Grandpa, for the good things and the hard things, for teaching us that family isn't just about blood or honesty or doing everything right. It's about showing up and trying and loving each other, even when it's complicated. We stood there for a long time, under that tree, in the yard where I'd played as a child, where my father had pushed me on a swing and taught me to throw a baseball. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. A breeze rustled the branches, and for just a moment, I could almost feel my father there with us, watching, hoping we'd found our way to this moment. As we left, I turned back one more time to look at the tree, at the house, at the place where so much of my life had begun. And I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out over the years, replaced by something softer and more sustainable. Understanding, maybe. Or acceptance. Or just the simple recognition that people are complicated, that love is complicated, and that family, in all its messy, imperfect glory, is worth fighting for. We went to dinner after that, all of us crowded into a restaurant that barely had enough space for our large group. The kids sat at one end of the table, the adults at the other, and the noise level was tremendous. Laughter and conversation, and the clatter of silverware, and the occasional shriek from one of the younger children. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. At one point, I looked down the table and caught Claire's eye. She smiled at me, and I smiled back, and in that moment, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the circumstances that had brought us together, but for the choice we'd all made to stay together, to build something new from the broken pieces we'd been left with. That night, lying in bed with Rachel beside me and Lily asleep in her crib across the room, I thought about my father's letter, the one he'd written before he died. He'd hoped we could forgive him, hoped we could become a family. And we had, though not in any way he probably imagined. We'd become a family not because of him, but in spite of him. And maybe in the end, that was the greatest gift he could have given us. The opportunity to choose each other, to build something real and lasting out of the rubble of his mistakes. I thought about Harrison's words under the tree, about legacy and what we leave behind. My father had left behind pain and secrets and a fractured family. But he'd also left behind people who loved each other enough to heal, to forgive, to move forward. And in the end, maybe that was enough. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The kind of peace that comes not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of love. The kind of peace that acknowledges the past but doesn't live in it. The kind of peace that says, yes, this was hard, and yes, we were hurt, but look at us now. Look at what we built. Look at what we became. And I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that we were going to be okay. More than okay. We were going to be happy, in all the complicated, messy, beautiful ways that real families are happy. We were going to keep showing up for each other, keep loving each other, keep building this life we'd created together. My father had been wrong about a lot of things. He'd lied and hidden and hurt the people he loved. But he'd been right about one thing. We were a family. All of us. And nothing, not even death, not even betrayal, not even the weight of secrets kept for decades, could change that. The story of my father's hidden daughter, of the lawyer's revelation that changed everything, had started with pain and anger and a sense of betrayal so deep it felt like drowning. But it had ended, or rather continued, with love and acceptance and the slow, difficult work of healing. It had ended with a family that was bigger and stranger and more resilient than any of us had imagined possible. And as I fell asleep that night, surrounded by the quiet breathing of my wife and daughter, knowing that tomorrow would bring more chaos and laughter and the beautiful mess of family life, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not for the journey we'd been forced to take, but for where it had led us. Not for my father's choices, but for our own. Not for the past, but for the present, and for the future we were building together, one day, one choice, one act of love at a time.